Where? Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. It's really a pleasure to be here in the Capacity Building Hub. We have exciting speakers, and it's an important topic. Today, we're going to discuss about local and traditional knowledge and their role in adaptation. So how we can really leverage this precious source of knowledge and information to build better adaptation strategy using nature. My name is Giacomo Fedele, and I'm the Adaptation Strategy Director at Conservation International, and I'm your moderator today. We have many distinguished speakers here from indigenous people and territorial communities, from global organizations that are working to strengthen capacities, doing research on the ground, and helping people to preserve their nature. And I'm going to introduce them just in a bit. I want to start maybe with a short story to highlight the topic of today. It's a bit of a sad story, but really highlight the importance of local knowledge. In a region in the Alps, not far where I come from, there is a mountain that's called the Mountain Talk. And many years ago, a big dam was built in this region to produce electricity. But the mountain was called as well the Walking Mountains, because the soil was very unstable. The local people knew that the soil was unstable, and they call it, even in their local language, the Rotten Mountain. What happened? The dam was built, and unfortunately, after so many heavy rains, in a period of heavy rains, a landslide started and happened and ended up in the lake, creating a huge tsunami, and the water fell downstream, creating huge damages. So this really highlights the importance of how we could have taken into account the traditional knowledge when planning this kind of project to be more sustainable and avoid any potential damage and harm to the environment and the people. We're going to start with two speakers from indigenous people representatives that are going to share a bit more about their stories, their experience about adaptation and strengthening local capacities. I want to invite, and I thank so much, Juan Carlos Hintiach. Thank you so much, Juan Carlos. And he's the Executive Secretary of the Global Alliance for the Territorial Communities. And I want to ask him to please talk a bit more about the role of the Alliance in bringing the topic of indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, into policies and plans, especially regarding to adaptation. How we can really leverage this type of knowledge, the role of the Alliance in bringing this important information to policymakers and project designers around the world. So, muchas gracias.
English? No? Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to be here, to be part of this panel. Yes, I am Juan Carlos Hintiach, Executive Director of the Global Alliance. First of all, let me explain very quickly the Global Alliance, who are the members. COICA, what is the umbrella indigenous organization from the Amazon Basin, 9 countries in South America, member of the Global Alliance. I am part of COICA. I am Shuar indigenous from the rainforest of Ecuador. So MPB, Mesoamerica and the Caribbean, indigenous organizations, local community, member of the Global Alliance. And then Brazil, all Brazil also member of the Global Alliance, indigenous and local communities in Brazil, not only Amazonia, people from the coast and the mountains and other ecosystems. Also Repaliac, what is Congo Basin, and Africa is a member of the Global Alliance, and Indonesia among organizations. So this we did a network globally. So going back to the question, and I have to share here why indigenous people, we get together, why we coordinate, and then how we get put in the agenda following this international arena here in climate change, COP27. From 1992, many indigenous organizations from the Rio Convention, and then we are following these international decisions. We were asking ourselves who are bringing our demands or struggles from the ground, or what we are doing on the ground, how we are working. So we need to put this attention globally because we are actors, right holders, and stakeholders from the ground, and we are living there in the forest. So in that context, the Global Alliance, members of the Global Alliance, we are connected with forests, we are connected to ecosystem, Mother Earth, and knowledge. So, for example, I'm going to mention here some couple examples. People from the rainforest, how we articulate, how we work. We develop our own plans in the community. We develop these own plans and different topics. We talk about knowledge, science knowledge, indigenous knowledge. We talk about adaptation, mitigation, resilience, and we have this. We talk this with elders, and this is the way how we communicate. We transform much scientific knowledge that they are mentioned in international arena, and how our knowledge from the ground are connected and to work together in bringing these demands here. So for the adaptations, we create in 2012 a big momentum that we need to discuss about our resilience, adaptation, mitigation, about the forest, because we have a lot of context, a lot of pressure from the international arena, for the national concept, because sometimes difficult to have articulation with some governments, as you know, but we put in the table how they are thinking or what concepts, how they are going to translate this language internationally to go in the ground. So we decide to put in the table, in discussion with the elders, a red indigenous in the Amazon. So what that means as a answer, indigenous answer, climatic answer to adapt or to convert to different knowledge. So this process of adaptation or answer for the climate change, we need to remind how the elders, the traditional knowledge, how are they monitoring, how are they manage with their own vision, their own cosmovision, with their own language, the forest, and not just water, no other ecosystems, as integral, as a holistic way. This is only that we need to put this on the table. Holistic, no, we cannot separate carbon, water, air, forest. We put in the table integral, and then we also need to respect this language, the intercultural language. This intercultural language, we need to answer the different groups, how they are transforming and presenting, how they are managing in their own vision. You know, because we have many different languages, many different customs, but all together, we need to make an answer for the international arena. So that is why, following the Paris Agreement, and then how they are going to Paris Agreement are going to give us the opportunity to, and then we say this in this momentum, as indigenous people, members of a local community, that who live in the forest, and we are there monitoring, we are there protecting the forest, we are then daily, we are the best actors to contribute from the ground to work together and to give the answer on this urgently what the climate crisis. So finally, it's my pleasure that many of the indigenous organizations from the global members of the Global Alliance, not just Amazonia, other ecosystems, we are coordinating, we are trying to put this, we cannot separate biodiversity and climate change. For us, it's integral, holistic. For us, people who live in the forest, we are clearly how we present us as actors in the sec level, but we asking these enable conditions we need to work on. If we want to go together, we need to get respect, and we need to be partners in a good way to go this process, by respecting and accepting all knowledge or traditional knowledge in all these processes. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Juan Carlos. Muchas gracias por compartir esta experiencia. And I know, Juan Carlos, you need to leave at some point, so thank you so much for being here. We can now move to the next speaker, and I really have the pleasure to introduce you Apollinaire Zongo. He is a beekeeper working in Burkina Faso. He's also a DGM, the Global Grant Mechanism for local communities and indigenous people. And he's going to share with us his experience working on the ground with communities, leveraging their adaptive capacities, building those capacities to adapt to climate change. Merci beaucoup pour être ici, c'est vraiment un plaisir. Et il y a votre présentation qui arrive.
Alors je dis un grand merci donc pour cette opportunité et je dis bonjour également à tous et à toutes. Et pour nous donc avoir cette tribune pour s'exprimer, c'est vraiment dire combien est-ce que le travail que nous faisons sur le terrain est vraiment remarquable. Et en tant qu'acteur direct et sur le terrain, nous dirons que lorsque nous parlons de changement climatique, ou plutôt, je dirais, de crise climatique par certains endroits, alors pour nous, cela se manifeste à deux niveaux. Et le premier niveau, je dirais que c'est la dégradation accélérée des sols et qui donc a pour conséquence aujourd'hui donc la perte croissante au niveau donc de la productivité et donc une baisse considérable donc des rendements de nos récoltes. Et cela est perceptible. Et cela fait qu'aujourd'hui, de plus en plus, nous avons donc beaucoup de difficultés à satisfaire donc les besoins alimentaires de nos populations. Le deuxième point que nous allons donc que nous remarquons en termes de manifestation donc de changement climatique, c'est aujourd'hui donc le bouleversement complet de la saison pluvieuse. Et cela se traduit aujourd'hui par le fait que les périodes qui étaient bien connues par nos populations pour les cultures sont bouleversées et cela fait que de façon concrète sur le terrain, nous n'arrivons pas très bien à nous adapter. Et ça, c'est d'une manière générale la remarque que nous faisons. Et pour faire face à cela, nous avons donc décidé ensemble, premièrement, pour les sols, parce que là, vous le voyez bien, à certains endroits, nous avons des sols qui sont complètement délavés, lessivés et qui sont impropres à la culture. Il faut donc des connaissances. Et nous avons tout simplement décidé de mettre en repos ces différents sols-là, de les observer pendant un bout de temps, 1 année, 2 ans, pour leur permettre de régénérer, pour leur permettre de restaurer et que nous puissions donc réadapter certaines activités à cela pour pouvoir donc satisfaire un certain nombre de besoins. Et en plus de cela, nous avons donc la deuxième solution que nous mettons en place, c'est la maîtrise d'eau. D'autant plus qu'aujourd'hui, tout est bouleversé sur le calendrier et agricole. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? Il faut donc que nous puissions maîtriser l'eau de sorte à ce que le peu que nous avons puisse être de façon efficace utilisé. Et dans ce sens, nous avons donc une technique qui est juste de faire des pokés sur les différents terrains. Et vous voyez ici que nous avons des populations qui sont prêtes, qui font face donc à des terres qui sont arides et qui doivent réhabiliter. Et à travers donc ces pokés, nous arrivons donc à faire des semis. Et lorsqu'il y a des pluies, il y a une certaine rétention d'eau qui permet donc à ce que ces semis-là puissent pousser et que donc ils se développent pour pouvoir vraiment faire et produire de façon efficace. Et nous nous sommes rendus compte que, au-delà des agriculteurs, qui sont de façon générale les hommes, alors il y a une réelle implication des femmes qui étaient en son temps sous-estimées. Mais aujourd'hui, il faut dire que aussi bien les hommes que les femmes font face à la même réalité et se donnent la main pour pouvoir donc relever le défi qui se présente à eux. En troisième position, ce que nous avons comme solution ici, c'est la symbiose que nous avons dans nos populations. Il faut dire qu'au Burkina Faso, nous sommes une population majoritairement agriculteurs et éleveurs. Comment cela se fait? Alors, les agriculteurs, lorsqu'ils arrivent à la fin donc, de la saison, alors décident de laisser les différentes tiges de mil, ainsi de suite, sur leur terrain pour attirer les animaux sur le terrain qui vont venir brouter et en même temps, sur place là-bas, fertiliser le sol à travers donc, la fumée organique que ces animaux donc, produisent. Et cette symbiose fait qu'il y a une complicité aujourd'hui entre agriculteurs et éleveurs à certains endroits de nos pays et qui font que nous arrivons donc à faire face à ces changements climatiques et à nous adapter vraiment de façon efficace à tout ce qu'il y a comme conséquence dans le changement climatique. Donc voici de façon très ramassée différents niveaux donc d'action que nous faisons sur le terrain pour pouvoir donc faire face donc au changement et à la crise climatique. Merci bien.
Merci beaucoup. Merci Apollinaire pour partager cette histoire. Thank you so much also for the translation. So Apollinaire, for the people online, maybe he told us his story about the communities he's working in Burkina Faso, the struggle with the soil erosion. However, there is this sense of communities between women and men to restore their life, the livelihood, and restore the hope through new seeds, rotational technique, and sustainable management of the land. We also heard from Juan Carlos the importance of this global alliance to really highlight the need to integrate knowledge independently if it's from science, from indigenous people. All this knowledge are point of view, experiences, and they bring to the table a very rich diversity and value that really should be integrated in our plans moving ahead for adaptation and our plans. The importance of culture, I also heard, and the importance of distinguishing within communities different groups. Communities are not always homogeneous, and it's also hard to distinguish benefit from forest. We talk about water, carbon, non-timber forest product, and improve soil fertility. All these should come together. We really need a holistic approach. I want now to move to the panelists. I'm so pleased to have three distinguished panelists from three global organizations working on this topic. I want to introduce you Johnson Cerda. He's the Senior Director for the Dedicated Grant Mechanism. He's part of the Global Executive Agency. He's working at CI as well, who is serving at the Secretariat. Welcome, Johnson. Thanks to be here. We also have Huria Judy. She's Senior Scientist at C4ICRAFT, working on adaptation since many years. And she knows Burkina Faso very well, Indonesia, and many other places. And finally, Amy Duchel. Thanks, Amy, to be here. It's a pleasure. She works for FAO. She's the Senior Forestry Officer and Team Leader on topics related to forest and resilience. Thanks again, everybody. I will start maybe with Huria and everybody else in the panel to comment a bit on what you heard, the very inspiring words from the global level, from Burkina Faso. What do you think and what are your impressions?
Thank you very much, Giacomo. Is this working? Thank you, Giacomo, and thank you for the speakers who really kind of touched to very, very important issues we are talking here at COP27 Juan Carlos, thank you very much for explaining how important it is to kind of shift the narrative from, using forest to living and being with the forest. And this is, the reality and the knowledge from indigenous people, and this is what we need to bring here. And it is not just, about integrating knowledge. It's about shifting the way we think and transforming the way we think about nature. And this is what indigenous people's knowledge is telling us. And I am talking as well as an indigenous woman from North Africa, being at the same time a scientist and an indigenous woman. So thank you very much for bringing that to this venue, and happy to see that, and we are organizing ourselves to get that message done. Apollinaire, I worked in Burkina Faso, and I think one point you really brought, and which I think is extremely important, is how local systems in the past were integrative. In Burkina Faso, you had the pastoralist working with the farmers to create a system where there is no lose-lose situation, where there is a win-win situation for everybody. Because they bring the animals in the field, you have a cycle of carbon in the soils, so both are benefiting, the farmers and the pastoralists. What happened, as you explained very well, is that policies, non-adapted policies, maladaptive policies, made that these systems are destroyed. So we need to stop working with policies who are destroying local knowledge and local systems who are adapted. Now we are asking these people and saying you have to adapt again. They were adapted, so why are we putting their policies who are not integrating the good practices who are in the reality, we people are doing them? And this is my call here, that we don't need to destroy and then to call for restore. We need to think to not destroy at the first place. So really happy that you brought that today. I also have one point actually about, Juan Carlos' intervention, which is, local knowledge and indigenous people knowledge is also between generations. So when we talk about capacity building, there is a capacity building happening in every indigenous community, because you learn from the elders, you respect the elders, the knowledge is given to you and you can take it. This is capacity building integrated in the culture, into the everyday life. It's not something coming, from top down to build capacities. So I will stop here, and I give the mic to whom?
To Johnson. Thanks, Huria, for these first reflections. I'm going to come back to you. You said very interesting points that I really want to come back. Johnson, an initial reflection on what you heard from your perspective.
All right. Thank you, Giacomo, and thank you for the invitation. Really interesting presentation from both colleagues. I believe that in the indigenous movement, at least in Latin America, also I observe in Africa, we have organizations already structured at the community level and working on specific topics related to climate action. Closer, right there? Okay. Related to climate action. And this is really important. Just let me comment on 3 topics. One is in relation to, Giacomo, when you started, you said about the importance of the language. And I've been, witnessing the situation in some of the cities. For example, in Quito, in Ecuador, there is a neighborhood in Ecuador called Turubamba, and it's flooding every year in the winter. And people is complaining, always saying, why this is flooding? It's not well done, And you know what happened? For us, Turubamba means a swamp. It's a place of flooding always. We understand that it's in our language. But when the people, they don't take that culturally, the language that we understand, and they build or they do whatever, the impact is going to be there. So we need to be connected with the language. That's really important. I know many cases where we don't identify the language, or we don't take the language or the meaning that we have in the communities in order to implement something. It's important to pay attention on that. The second thing is, I think with the DGM project, we have supported at the global level in order to strengthen, first of all, the governance system for indigenous peoples and local communities in order to make their own decisions, receive funding directly, their own decisions, and decisions on what actually they want to implement for climate action at the local level. So examples like in Burkina Faso, we have many in Brazil where communities are implementing what they believe is important for them. For instance, they have the seed banks. Really in Brazil is helping for them to reforest, to bring, or to maintain the crops that they have in that region of the Cerrado area. And that is helping a lot. The communities, they know what to do if they have access to the resources. So that is important. I recognize that also in Burkina Faso, they've been trying to reduce the emission because they use also the woods, right, for charcoal. And they've been doing interesting work in order to reduce the emission from that. That is important. It's connected to what you are saying about an indigenous knowledge. I think this is important. For many years, I see that when we do capacity building, always we take, the view, the Western view of capacity building, from creating a protected area, the science-based implementation, but not integrating the view that we have in the communities in order to provide a capacity building. So the integration of that is important, not only protected area, but in the case of the comments that our colleagues have made, in order to implement at the community level, we need to strengthen the knowledge of indigenous peoples. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you so much, Johnson. Thanks for your great points. And I'm going to come back to some of them later. Emmy, what's your general reflection and what are your thoughts at this point?
Thanks so much for inviting me to this really rich panel. And just many things going in my head right now. I think what the real challenge now, and I think we've seen this since last week, there are these wonderful examples of locally led adaptation efforts around the world. And we heard this very clearly today as well. And building on what Julia was saying, really the challenge now is that the policies are in place to be able to support that. So really not only enhancing ambition by governments to mitigate against climate change, but also putting the right policies in place that are informed by the local level work to actually facilitate transformational adaptation. And this is a huge challenge, but if we don't somehow find the way to have the enabling conditions for all of this to happen, this is just not going to fly. And so I think from an organization like FAO, really the challenge is, when we're thinking about sort of our knowledge products that go out and are sort of read and taken up by policymakers, something that we're really trying to push is that you do not have forest-based or tree-based climate action without meaningful engagement of indigenous peoples. This is sort of making that extremely clear over and over again. Something else that we're working on is monitoring adaptation services. And a lot of FAO's national forest monitoring work has been really focused on the spatial level for supporting national forest monitoring systems. Well, thinking of ways to really bring in sort of the local monitoring into these national systems. And there are good examples of that, including from the REDD+ experience. Maybe the other point is that when thinking about the adaptation elements of nationally determined contributions and strengthening those, as well as national adaptation plans, these are really key policy instruments where these kinds of local experiences can be informing these critical policy tools. And then finally, when we're thinking about climate finance, and FAO supports countries in leveraging climate finance, really ensuring that finance is going to the ground, and ensuring that it's really going to those who are on the ground protecting, sustainably managing, and restoring forest and tree-based landscapes. Thanks.
Thanks, Emmy. Thanks so much. I want to go back to Julia, and Julia, asking you a bit from your organizational perspective side. You're working on research. What what is your organization doing to support capacity building? I know you're working on scientific papers and documenting best practices and summarizing all these best practices to make it more accessible, all science-based. And then if you can also mention this interesting point that you just told us, you are a woman scientist, also an indigenous woman, and how do you use these two different knowledge in your work on adaptation? How do you reconcile them, or how they actually help you to work even better?
Okay, I will start with the easy question, which is the first one, and I will leave the second one for my second, later on. Yeah, C4E-Craft, we are a research organization, but research organization actually not in development. So we are based in many countries, and we are based also in the countries, we are based in regions in some countries, which make us actually an organization which is informed a lot by what is happening in the ground. And in the work on adaptation, which we started a long time ago, actually, one of the first global comparative project on adaptation and forest and trees was a C4 project with other partners, of course, and we learned a lot in this project. And this is, I think, one important issue. Then, as scientists, when we go to the communities, we shouldn't go to the communities with the spirit of we are, having the solution already there, and we are going to bring you the solution. No, this is not the way. We go there to learn from the communities, to understand the context. And then we have solutions. We can think of solutions, but together, and they need to be adapted to the context. We don't say that enough, and I know, when you talk to donors and you say, I need 3 years in the field to understand how adaptation is happening, and I need to understand the best practices, all donors will be, oh no, this is too long. This is not too long, because we are talking here about, co-producing knowledge and creating a knowledge which is responding to the challenges we are experiencing. So in C4E-Craft, we try really to build that into the way we work. And in, not only in adaptation, but in all other aspects we work. And I would just give here an example. As Amy was saying, we are seeing that forests and trees, when the whole debate on climate change started, forests and trees are seen from the mitigation point of view. This is carbon. The forest, tree, carbon. And we are seeing a big problem here because we are neglecting an extremely important role of trees and forests for resilience, for people in the ground to adapt. Forests and trees produce so many, they give us so many gifts to adapt, but we need to protect this forest to give us this gift they are giving us. So there is something there which we need to develop, best practices and principles. So we are working with FAO together to develop kind of, what are the guiding concept we can think of to make this role of forest and trees for adaptation more explicit and clearly, kind of formulated in the adaptation arena at the national level or here at the global level. And we came up, we had like a lot of consultations with people working on adaptation, and we came up with 10 principles. We are working on publishing this paper, and FAO is taking this forward to the policy arena. But what I wanted to say today is, interestingly, from the 10 principles, we have 5 principles who are linked to local communities and the knowledge of local communities. So this is something which came from the analysis, and this is where we see the gap and where we really need to act all together to kind of cover this gap. And so one of the things I really would like to speak about here, we talk a lot about, the integration of local knowledge or indigenous people knowledge. Integration is not enough, because integration has also something, we have already our path, how we change the world, and then we are going to integrate a little bit of knowledge from here and from there. This is not the way it works, simply because the knowledge, the local and indigenous people system is a completely different system. It's a system which identifies your relationship with nature. And this is what we need to change. So integrating in a very incremental way is not going to solve our problem. So what is the difference? What should we be doing differently? I think one thing we should do differently is to give and to allow leadership of indigenous peoples in managing their forests and their trees, and we learn from that system. And I think that the other aspect we need to do is, the local knowledge and indigenous people knowledge is an opportunity for us to transform the way we live, to transform the relationships we have among each other, with nature, and it can start in here in this panel, it can start in this room, it can start at COP27, it starts everywhere. So this is not something, a big change who is going to come from somewhere. We have to do it in the way we relate to nature and in the way we relate to each other. So those principles try actually to give an idea about what is this transformation we need, all of us. What is this transformation we have to go for, that we can make, a better life for the people who are living from and in the forest and the people who are using these resources in the ground. So I will stop here, and I don't know, I think it's Amy.
Yes, it would be nice to hear from Hemi, actually, yes. How you're a partner in this effort, and how you're bringing this knowledge product and continuing the policy work to build on these principles. And then I want to ask you, because you work both, interestingly, on adaptation and mitigation, and we heard from Juan Carlos, sometimes it's hard even to see the distinction between all these different forest benefits when you implement project on the ground. What did you learn from your different side of climate change, and how capacity building is an important component of that? Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, thanks. It's been very nice for FAO to be able to work with C4ECRAF on the development of these principles for forest-based adaptation. And, we launched the paper on this on Saturday at the Global Landscape Forum on Climate. And the next step of this is really to figure out how to incorporate these principles into some of these policy instruments that I was mentioning. So the adaptation components of enhanced NDCs, and then also the NAPs, the National Adaptation Plans. And so really the next step for this work is to work with a few of FAO member countries where there is demand for this kind of support in national adaptation plans, to bring in some of these elements. And as Horia said, of the 10 principles, 5 are directly related to the topic that we are discussing today. And in the paper that we launched on Saturday, we were using case studies to illustrate each of the principles. And I have to say it was quite challenging, because so many of especially the local case studies where you're talking about knowledge, techniques, capacities, adaptation options that are based on traditional knowledge, really address many of those principles. So it was sort of hard to sort of slot them in as a way to illustrate. I think for the mitigation side, this is something that I worked on for a long time with REDD+. And we're at a very interesting point with REDD+ now, where finally there is some real market signal for forest carbon. And, all of the national REDD+, we have so many national REDD+ strategies, jurisdictional strategies. We really have the policy frameworks in place. We have indigenous peoples at the table. Safeguards are right at the top of the agenda. And now finance is really ready to flow in a more meaningful way. And I think we're at a very, the interesting thing here is that when we think about adaptation, the forests that are storing and sequestering this carbon, and that, sort of all of this finance and accounting is based on, these forests are also losing their resilience under climate change. And so the idea of permanence of forest carbon credits is really at the fore. And so a lot of the mitigation folks who have been focused on the carbon accounting side for a long time are now suddenly realizing that, we really have to understand the ability of forests themselves to adapt and maintain their resilience in the face of climate change, or we simply cannot ensure the permanence of these credits. So I think we have an opportunity, in fact, with the REDD+ community, with the mitigation community, to bring a lot of this adaptation and resilience thinking to the fore. And just 1 month ago at FAO's 26th Committee on Forestry meeting, I was stunned to hear from a diversity of countries when we were discussing the forest and climate agenda item. Most were focused on adaptation and resilience. And when talking about, the benefits of forests for climate change, it was adaptation, resilience, and mitigation coming third, which is really different than how it's been over the last 15 years. And it's because of this recognition that, yes, we still need to enhance our mitigation ambition, but we're in a situation where we're also needing to accelerate our support and understanding of support for and finance for adaptation and resilience. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. Yes, this important point about the local benefits of adaptation, and that's potentially also why we are really seeing the traction. And I think the DGM, the Global Grant Mechanism for Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities, is working on that. And I want to ask you, Johnson, how is the Conservation International approach through this work, working with different fellows in different regions and helping them to implement their work with their knowledge and sharing this knowledge? How is this happening?
Thank you. Thank you again. Okay, in the work we do, I don't think we have activities clearly saying that this is an adaptation action or this is a mitigation action. We are working more holistically and to improve the livelihood of the people, of the communities, and their best experiences we are connecting with mitigation and adaptation later in this space here, like on climate context. Because mainly for instance, we were working in Indonesia with, trying to provide capacity building on REDD+, and they said that for us it's better to work on land tenure because we want to secure our land first, and then work on livelihood. And perhaps REDD+ is going to be a complement, but that is not our focus right now. We would like to work on other topics that, at the end, perhaps we respond to mitigation, adaptation, and also REDD+, let's say in this case. So what we do is, as we have 12 different countries with their own resources, their own governance mechanisms, as I said, they make decisions on implementing activities. So they have a special component on capacity building, and they have a component on sustainable forest management. And what we do at the global level as a global project, we are now 7 years running on this project. What we do is we identify together with them the best experiences that they have in each of the countries, and we do exchange. We started with regional exchange in each region, but then, the leadership, indigenous peoples and local communities, they said, no, we would like now to have very targeted exchange, because we would like, for instance, learn about how in Peru they are reducing the time of land tenure, because we would like to learn in DRC and in Indonesia. So we are trying to provide that type of exchange. Or, for instance, recently we had an exchange from Brazil and 3 weeks ago, actually, and Mozambique, because of the language, the ecosystem, it was perfect. The Cerrado area with the north part of one of the parts in Mozambique. Great exchange. They learned a lot. They came really enjoying that exchange because they were able to exchange what they were doing with the medicinal plants, for instance. It sounds like simple, but important for communities to defend themselves, for instance, in the previous years against the COVID. So they've been exchanging experiences that they had. So that is what we do at the region. Targeted exchange now. But also we have a global exchange. Still we have that because we would like to exchange these experiences that we are having with not only among DGM project, but also other we want to provide this experience to other networks like the alliance with our other Hintiach or other networks we have in the region. So that is the plan what we have. But I wanted to make a couple comments here is that talking about the policy, in countries like Ecuador, I'm Ecuadorian from the Amazon, what I see in our constitution is the recognition of the ancestral knowledge. They call it like that, ancestral wisdom. And they said that this is important topic that need to be across all the policies at the national level. So they are committed to implement. When you see in the implementation of the different institutions, the only institution using the ancestral knowledge concept is one of the programs related to CBD. The rest, climate change, all the projects, they are not using. So when we ask them why you are not using this important aspect of the knowledge from communities, they said because we don't have capacity on that. We don't know about that. We don't know what is indigenous knowledge. We don't know what is ancestral knowledge. And also we don't have resources, finally, they say. So that is, even we create at the constitutional level, we have policies we can implement. We don't have at the national level capacity for that. So that's one key important issue. The other thing is that many interesting activities with the DGM or other projects implemented in the communities are really great examples. But the problem is that we are doing, with one hand, with the Minister of the Environment, for instance, doing something, the Energy Ministry comes and then do whatever they want to do. So there is no interinstitutional coordination at the national level. So that's affecting us. Even we are having successful projects, it's affecting a lot. And we have seen that, and also it's a call, attention to the governments that they need to coordinate and enhance the activities that we are doing as a communities, because that is something really contributing for climate action. So that is important, and I wanted to highlight that, experiences that we are having in DGM is really supporting the national determined contribution as well. But if they include this contribution to their NDCs, that would be, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnson. I know Apollinaire had a comment on what he heard, and please, go ahead, Apollinaire.
Je vous remercie. Je voudrais juste revenir sur un aspect qui, pour nous, au Burkina Faso, est très important et dont Ouria a fait cas. C'est vraiment le conflit qu'il existe entre les politiques et les connaissances traditionnelles et culturelles. Il y a vraiment matière à faire. Parce que très souvent, on nous envoie des technologies qui sont toutes faites et qui sont en contradiction, en parfaite contradiction avec les connaissances et qui bouleversent donc la cohésion sociale et qui met à mal donc les techniques et pour faire face donc à l'adaptation climatique. Et je lance en même temps un cri de cœur à l'ensemble donc des projets. Nous, c'est vrai que nous sommes en train de changer le paradigme, le concept de passer de bénéficiaires donc à partenaires dans les projets, et il faudrait donc qu'on tienne compte de ce que nous savons faire. Il faudrait donc que pendant la conception et dans la mise en œuvre, que l'on tienne compte résolument des connaissances et des aspects sociaux pour que nous puissions donc réussir de façon efficace donc l'adaptation à notre contexte. Voilà donc ce que je voulais dire. Merci.
Merci, Apollinaire. Thank you so much. It's such a good point about indigenous people, local community, be equal partner in project design. If we bring technologies from outside, almost 100% they're not going to work. We really need the buy-in, the experience of communities to build technologies and approaches that make sense for the local context. I think we are really at the final 2-3 minutes, so I just ask the great panelists if you have anything to add, 1-2 words for really concluding this great session this morning here. Urian?
Thank you very much, Giacomo. This is a very rich discussion today. And you asked me before about, being a woman and an indigenous woman and a scientist, and I didn't answer this question, maybe because it's a difficult one to answer. But I just want to say that what I'm hearing here is also what I am learning, in my trajectory, navigating these different words. And I think one of them is, the holistic approaches. We are talking here, you were talking about, how the fragmentation between policies is hindering the way that we are moving. You are talking about the fragmentation between the local and the national, Apollinaire. And I think one aspect we can learn from the indigenous people's knowledge is really like these holistic approaches. We don't protect, for instance, forest because it will give us something, adaptation services or carbon. We protect forest because we need to protect all lives. That's it. Even we are a part of it, and we don't need, to get something, in the thinking of we have to get something from the forest in order to protect that forest. And we need to, this is something, for instance, these holistic approaches to the way we live with nature is something I try to bring in my, in my working. But also, this humility of learning from nature and learning from others, this is also something I think it's extremely important here, but learning at the same level and without, power relations between which knowledge is more important and which knowledge is less, and which knowledge we give a higher value and which knowledge we don't value.
Thank you, so powerful.
I just think I'm still struck that we these very clear calls for, real partnerships, and we just heard it from our colleague here. Sort of when are we going to learn, as especially international organizations, to really engage in these real partnerships where the rights holders, the managers of the resources on the ground are the real leaders in the initiatives that we put forward, and we are there to support and learn and listen and not lead, in fact, and to really engage in a very genuine partnership. And I think that, yes, the discourse is there, but we have a lot to do to transform our own organizations to really get there to make this happen in a real way.
Thanks so much, Amy. Anything from Johnson?
Yeah, perhaps just the issue of that the voices of indigenous people need to be heard, and they've been saying loudly here since many years about that direct access also to the resources, because they could do or reduce the time of implementation and make it really good with our support, the institution support. And that's, I think we need still to keep in mind that they are, calling for that, and they are demonstrating their contribution, and I think we need to move a little bit faster toward that, right? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank everybody for this very interesting discussion. It was such a diverse panel, which is basically representing a bit the struggle we are all facing here. We need this different perspective all together to really implement solutions that are sustainable and are really benefiting and the local beneficiaries as equal partner. So thanks so much for your attention in the audience, and see you soon. Bye-bye.